H1, the Ultimatum. The message came on a Tuesday. It arrived on every screen, every channel, every communication device that humanity had ever built. It played in hospitals and schools, in military command rooms and quiet living rooms. It interrupted music and news and the gentle hum of daily life. And when it finished playing, the world went very, very quiet. The face on the screen belonged to Supreme Commander Vorath of the Delvari hegemony. He was tall even by alien standards, with skin like polished iron and eyes that burned a dull orange. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, and behind him, through a massive viewport, the stars were blotted out by warships, thousands of them, tens of thousands. His voice was deep, and the translation software made it sound flat and cold. To the species known as humans, Vorath said, "You have expanded beyond your boundaries. You have settled worlds that do not belong to you. You have reached into space that the hegemony claims as its own. This is your one and only warning. You have 30 standard galactic days to withdraw all colonies beyond your home star system. You will surrender your fleet. You will accept vassal status under the hegemony. If you refuse, we will come for you. And when we arrive, there will be nothing left to negotiate." The camera pulled back to show the full scale of the Grand Armada. 40,000 warships, arranged in perfect rows that stretched beyond sight. The largest fleet ever assembled in the known galaxy. It was not just a threat. It was a promise, written in metal and fire. The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, the reaction was immediate. Every spacefaring species had seen it. The Pelori Trade Collective began pulling their investments from human space within the hour. Elder Grenick, the shrewd old leader of the Pelori, dictated a memo to his advisors that simply read, "Write off all human accounts. They are finished." On a dozen other worlds, diplomats shook their heads and said what everyone was thinking. The humans were a young species. They had only been among the stars for 200 years. They had a small fleet, a handful of colonies, and no real allies. Against the Delvari hegemony, they had no chance at all. On Earth, panic spread like fire through dry grass. The news networks ran the footage of the Armada on a loop. Politicians shouted at each other in emergency sessions. Protesters filled the streets in every major city, some demanding surrender, some demanding war, and most just demanding that someone, anyone, tell them what was going to happen. In the middle of all this noise, a meeting took place in a plain gray room deep beneath the city of Busan. The room had no windows, no decorations, and a single long table. Around that table sat the people who would decide the fate of humanity. Admiral Tejo sat at the head. He was a man in his early 60s, with short gray hair and a face that rarely showed what he was thinking. He had fought in 3 border skirmishes and commanded Earth's defense fleet for a decade. He was known for 2 things, his patience and his silence. He was not a man who spoke unless he had something worth saying. Beside him sat Yuna, Earth's chief diplomat. She was younger, in her 40s, with sharp eyes, and a smile that had ended more arguments than most weapons. She had spent 20 years negotiating with alien species, and she had a reputation across the galaxy for being impossible to intimidate. At the far end of the table sat Sujin, the director of intelligence. She was thin, pale, and so quiet that people sometimes forgot she was in the room. That was exactly how she liked it. Sujin knew things. She knew secrets that governments had buried and truths that empires had tried to erase. She was the most dangerous person at the table, and she had not said a word since sitting down. For several minutes, nobody spoke. They had all watched the broadcast. They had all seen the numbers. 40,000 warships against humanity's fleet of roughly 800. The math was simple and brutal. Then Tejo did something unexpected. He replayed the broadcast. He watched it again, carefully, from beginning to end. And then he played it a third time. And then he laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It was quiet, almost to himself, like a man who had just understood a joke that nobody else had heard. The others at the tables stared at him. "He is afraid," Tejo said simply. Yuna raised an eyebrow. "He has 40,000 ships." "Yes," Tejo said, "and he used every single one of them in that broadcast. Think about that. If you are truly powerful, you do not need to show everything you have. You send 5 ships and a polite note." Vorath put his entire armada on display because he wanted to scare us so badly that we would surrender without a fight. That is not confidence. That is a man who does not want a war. Sujin spoke for the first time. "He is right. My sources inside the hegemony confirm it. The Delvari economy is stretched thin. Vorath built that armada by taking resources from vassal worlds. The Tani, the Uruk, the Kelly, they are already unhappy. A long war would break the hegemony from the inside." Yuna leaned back in her chair. "So he needs us to fold quickly." "Yes," Tejo said, "which means we absolutely cannot." The room was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. The fear was still there, but now it shared space with something else. Something that looked a lot like possibility. "We need to respond," Yuna said, "publicly. On the same channel they used." Tejo nodded. "Make it good." Not her diplomatic smile, but the other one. The one that made alien ambassadors nervous. "Oh, I intend to." 3 days later, Earth's response was broadcast on every galactic channel. It was not a speech. It was not a declaration of war. It was a 2-minute video, produced in the style of a late-night infomercial, with bright colors and cheerful music. Yuna appeared on screen, smiling warmly. "Are you tired of your independence?" she began. "Do you wish someone would just take away your freedom and make all your decisions for you? Then you will love the Delvari hegemony's exciting new galactic subjugation package." The video listed the terms of the ultimatum like product features. Includes loss of all territory, surrender of your entire fleet, and the lifetime joy of serving a species that thinks you are beneath them. Act now. Supplies of dignity are limited. We regret to inform the Delvari hegemony that after careful review, we would like to cancel our scheduled annihilation. No refunds. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Some species were horrified. Others laughed so hard they could barely breathe. On Pelori trading stations, the video was shared millions of times within an hour. On Delvari vassal worlds, people watched it in secret and smiled. On the bridge of his flagship, Vorath watched it in silence. Then he crushed the display screen with his bare hand. "They have chosen death," he said. Far away, in that plain gray room beneath Busan, Tejo turned to his team. The laughter was gone from his face now, replaced by something harder and steadier. "Good," he said. "Angry enemies make mistakes. Now, let us get to work." The countdown began the day the ultimatum was delivered. 30 galactic standard days. On the screens and feeds across human space, someone had built a clock that ticked down in real time. It hung in the corner of every broadcast, every news report, every conversation. It was always there, reminding everyone how little time they had left. But behind closed doors, Admiral Tejo was not watching the clock. He was building something. He called it Operation Jindo, after an island off the southern coast of Korea, where centuries ago the sea itself had parted to create a hidden path. The name was fitting. Tejo did not plan to meet the Delvari Armada head-on. He was not foolish enough to throw 800 ships against 40,000. Instead, he planned to make the sea part. He planned to create paths where the enemy saw only walls, and walls where the enemy expected open ground. The first piece of the plan belonged to Dongwu. Dongwu was the head of Earth's Science and Weapons Division. He was a tall, messy man in his late 50s, who wore the same wrinkled lab coat every day, and had a habit of talking to machines as if they were pets. He was also, without question, the most brilliant engineer alive. For the past 3 years, he had been working on a project that most of the military had dismissed as a waste of money. He called them swarm seeds. A single swarm seed was small enough to fit in a person's hand. It looked like a metal marble with tiny folded wings. But once launched into space, it would unfold, activate, and begin copying itself using raw materials from dust and debris. Within hours, 1 seed became 100. Within days, 100 became 1,000,000. Each tiny drone was weak. It had no weapons, no shields, and no real intelligence. But together, 1,000,000 of them became a cloud that could blind sensors, jam communications, confuse targeting systems, and turn the clean geometry of a battle formation into pure chaos. "They are like mosquitoes," Dongwu explained to Teo, grinning like a child showing off a drawing. "1 mosquito is nothing. 1,000,000 mosquitoes will drive you mad." Teo approved full production immediately. Factories across human space began stamping out swarm seeds by the millions, loading them into delivery pods that could be fired from any ship or even launched from the surface of a planet. The second piece belonged to Sujin. The intelligence director had been busy long before the ultimatum arrived. She had spent years quietly building a network of contacts inside the Delvari hegemony. Not among the Delvari themselves. They were too proud and too watched. Instead, she had reached out to the species that lived under Delvari rule. The Tani, a race of small, clever engineers who maintained most of the hegemony's ships. The Uruk, massive and strong, who provided the manual labor for Delvari construction projects. And the Kali, an aquatic species whose homeworld had been conquered 3 centuries ago, and who had never stopped resenting it. None of these species loved the Delvari. They served because they had no choice. But Sujin understood something important. You did not need people to rebel. You just needed them to be slow. A fuel shipment delayed by 2 days, a communication relay that developed mysterious errors, a supply depot where the inventory numbers did not quite match. Small things, invisible things. But in a war that stretched across light years, small delays could kill an army more surely than any weapon. Sujin made her contacts a simple offer. She did not ask them to risk their lives. She only asked them to be a little careless, to make small mistakes, to look the other way at the right moment. Most of them agreed. The third piece belonged to Yuna. While the galaxy was still laughing at her infomercial video, Yuna was already 3 moves ahead. She traveled in secret to a Pelori trading station on the edge of neutral space, where she requested a private meeting with Elder Grenick. Grenick was old, even by Pelori standards. His species resembled tall, thin birds with iridescent feathers that shifted color with their mood. Grenick's feathers were currently a cautious gray. He had agreed to the meeting out of curiosity, but he made his position clear from the start. "The Pelori do not fight wars," he said. "We trade, we profit, we survive. Your species is brave, Diplomat Yuna, but bravery does not stop plasma fire." Yuna did not argue. Instead, she placed a small data device on the table between them and activated it. A holographic projection filled the air, charts, numbers, trade routes, projections. "You are correct," Yuna said. "The Pelori trade. So let us talk about trade. Right now, the Starforge crystal nebula near our colonies is in disputed space. If the Delvari destroy us, they take full control of it. That gives them a monopoly on Starforge crystals. Every species that needs those crystals, and that is nearly every spacefaring species in the galaxy, will have to buy from the hegemony, at whatever price they set." She watched Grenick's feathers shift from gray to a troubled shade of amber. A Delvari monopoly on Starforge crystals would cost the Pelori Trade Collective an estimated 12% of total annual revenue. Yuna continued calmly. "That is not a projection. That is simple math. What do you want from us?" he asked. I am not asking you to fight, Yuna said, echoing what Sujin had told the vassal species. I am asking you to sell. Or more precisely, I am asking you to stop selling, at the right moment, to the right customer. Grenick said nothing. His feathers cycled through several colors. Finally he stood. I will think about it, he said, and left. Yuna watched him go. She knew that I will think about it from a Pilori trader meant the deal was already half done. The fourth piece belonged to Captain Jinho. While the strategists planned and the diplomats negotiated, Jinho was given the most dangerous job of all. He was to take his ship, the ESS Horizon, along with a small squadron of fast attack vessels, and strike directly at Delvari staging areas along the border. Not to do real damage, they did not have the firepower for that, but to be seen. To make the Delvari angry and confused. Jinho was perfect for the job. He was 34, reckless, charming, and absolutely fearless in a way that worried everyone who knew him. His crew loved him, because he never asked them to take a risk he would not take himself. The rest of the fleet respected him, because he had an almost supernatural ability to find the one gap in an enemy formation, and slip through it like water through a crack. His raids began on day 5 of the countdown. The Horizon would appear at the edge of a Delvari staging zone, fire a barrage of missiles at supply depots and sensor stations, and vanish into faster-than-light travel, before the Delvari could respond. After each strike, Jinho would broadcast a short message on open channels. Sorry about the mess. We will send a cleaning crew. Is this the Delvari hegemony? Your security is terrible. Day 8. Still here. How is the Armada doing? The Delvari were furious. They diverted patrol ships to hunt the Horizon, which was exactly what Teho wanted. Every ship chasing Jinho was a ship not preparing for the invasion. On day 15, Teho gathered his senior officers for a progress report. The swarm seeds were ready. Sujin's network was in place. Yuna's diplomatic work was bearing fruit. Jinho was alive and still taunting the enemy. They were still outnumbered, still outgunned. The clock was still ticking. But when Teho looked around the room, he did not see fear. He saw people working harder and faster and smarter than anyone thought possible. He saw a species that had been told to kneel and had chosen to stand. We do not need to win the war, Teho told them quietly. We need to make the war too expensive to fight. We need to make every step they take cost them something they cannot afford to lose. Ships, fuel, money, allies, pride. We attack all of it. We make them bleed from 1,000 small cuts until they realize that conquering us will cost them more than leaving us alone. He paused. 15 days left. Let us make them count. Nobody in that room doubted him. The mockery that shook the stars. Day 25. The Grand Armada moved. 40,000 warships crossed the border into human-adjacent space in a formation so large that it registered on deep space sensors as a solid wall of metal. The ships moved in perfect columns, each one holding its position with mechanical precision. From a distance, it looked less like a fleet and more like a country, a nation of iron and fire, drifting through the dark. Supreme Commander Vorath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Unbroken Will, and watched the stars slide past. He had waited long enough. The humans had been given their chance to surrender, and they had thrown it back in his face with jokes and insults. Every day that passed, every mocking broadcast, every raid by that cursed little ship, the Horizon, had chipped away at his patience. Now, there was nothing left but cold resolve. Full advance, Vorath ordered. No stops, no delays. We end this. Across the galaxy, every species with a sensor array turned to watch. News feeds ran constant coverage. Commentators analyzed fleet movements and predicted outcomes. The consensus was nearly universal. Humanity had put up a brave and entertaining fight, but the numbers were the numbers. 40,000 warships would roll over human space like a wave over sand. Then Earth released another video. This time, it was a nature documentary. The opening shot showed the Delvari Armada from long-range telescope footage, the thousands of ships glittering against the black of space. Soft, gentle music played, and then Yuna's voice came in, calm and warm, as if she were narrating a program about migrating birds. Here we observe the greater Delvari war fleet in its natural habitat, Yuna said. Notice the rigid formation pattern, typical of a species that values obedience over creativity. The fleet moves as one body, which appears impressive, but also means that if the lead ships become confused, the entire formation can collapse like a line of falling stones. The video showed close-up shots of individual Delvari warships, each one labeled with fake scientific names. A heavy battlecruiser was called Bigus Angrius. A destroyer class was labeled Compensatus Maximus. The Delvari fleet relies heavily on supply lines stretching back to hegemony space, Yuna continued. Much like a large animal that must eat constantly to maintain its size, the Armada is surprisingly fragile when separated from its food source. Researchers predict that without steady supplies of fuel and ammunition, the fleet may become sluggish, irritable, and prone to poor decisions. The video ended with a shot of the Armada and a final line from Yuna. If you enjoyed this program, please do not forget to like and share. The Delvari certainly will not enjoy it, but that is rather the point. The video spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. On Pelori trading stations, merchants howled with laughter and forwarded it to everyone they knew. On independent worlds, people watched it in bars and cafes and laughed until they cried. Even on Delvari vassal worlds, copies appeared on private networks, shared in secret, watched behind closed doors with hands pressed over mouths to muffle the laughter. The Delvari had spent centuries building their reputation as the most feared military power in the galaxy. In the space of 2 minutes, Yuna had turned them into a joke. But the video was not just comedy. It was a signal. Deep inside the Delvari hegemony, Sujin's network activated. The Tani engineers who maintained the Armada's rear supply ships began making mistakes. Fuel orders were filed with incorrect routing codes, sending tankers to the wrong coordinates. Communication relays in the logistics chain developed faults that lasted just long enough to delay critical messages by hours. On the Uruk labor worlds, loading crews worked at half speed, blaming equipment failures that somehow could never be traced. And the Kali, the aquatic species who had served the Delvari for 300 years with silent hatred, did something far more dramatic. The 4,000 auxiliary warships that the Kali had been forced to contribute to the Armada simply stopped. One by one, their engines powered down, their weapons went cold, and then, slowly, they turned around and began heading home. When Vorath received the report, he did not believe it at first. 4,000 ships, nearly 10% of his fleet, gone in a matter of hours. He demanded an explanation. The Kali response was short. Our ships require maintenance. We are returning to our home waters. Everyone knew it was a lie. Nobody could prove it. The Armada was now down to 36,000 ships, and its supply lines were beginning to stutter. Fuel that should have arrived on schedule was late. Ammunition shipments were short. Repair parts were missing. None of it was catastrophic on its own, but together, it was like sand in a machine, grinding, slowing, wearing things down. And then Dongwu's swarm seeds hit. Taeho had ordered them launched days earlier, fired in pods from hidden positions along the Armada's projected path. By the time the Delvari vanguard reached the deployment zone, the seeds had already multiplied into vast clouds of tiny drones, billions of them, spread across millions of kilometers of space like an invisible fog. The lead Delvari squadrons flew straight into it. The effect was immediate and devastating. Sensor screens that had been clean and sharp suddenly dissolved into static. Targeting computers, designed to track hundreds of objects at once, were overwhelmed by millions. The drones were too small to shoot individually and too numerous to ignore. They clung to hull surfaces and interfered with shield harmonics. They drifted into engine intakes and caused power fluctuations. In the chaos, ships began firing at contacts that did not exist. A Delvari cruiser, blinded by sensor ghosts, fired a full broadside into empty space and struck an Allied destroyer that had drifted out of formation. The destroyer broke apart. Two more ships, swerving to avoid the debris, collided with each other. Within an hour, the Delvari vanguard had lost 11 ships without a single human vessel firing a shot. Vorath ordered the fleet to halt and recalibrate sensors. But the swarm seeds adapted. Every time the Delvari engineers found a way to filter them out, the drones shifted their signal pattern. It was like trying to swat smoke. While the Armada was blind and stumbling, Captain Jinho made his move. The Horizon, along with a squadron of 6 fast attack ships, had been hiding in the shadow of a rogue asteroid, running silent for 3 days. When the swarm scenes hit, Jinho launched. His target was not a weapons platform or a fuel depot. It was the Unbroken Will itself, Vorath's flagship. Not to destroy it. The Horizon did not have the firepower for that. Instead, Jinho's mission was to get close enough to deliver a data package. The run was insane. 7 small ships against thousands. But the Delvari sensors were blinded, their formations were in disarray, and Jinho knew exactly where the gaps would be. The Horizon slipped through the chaos like a needle through fabric, dodging debris and confused patrols, and fired a single data torpedo at the flagship's communication array. The torpedo was not a weapon. It was a message. It contained intercepted communications, stolen by Sujin's agents over the past year, that proved Vorath had diverted resources meant for vassal worlds to build his armada. Schools that should have been built on Tani worlds. Hospitals that the Uruk had been promised. Infrastructure funds that had been quietly redirected to weapons factories. The proof was detailed, undeniable, and damning. The data package did not just reach Vorath's flagship. It was broadcast simultaneously to every vassal world in the hegemony. The result was an earthquake. 3 vassal governments issued public demands for an investigation. Protests erupted on 6 worlds. The Tani government, normally the most obedient of the vassal species, released a statement calling the situation deeply troubling, which, in Tani diplomatic language, was the equivalent of screaming. And then the Pelori made their move. Elder Grenick had been watching everything carefully, his feathers shifting through colors as the situation developed. He had watched the Delvari stumble. He had watched the Kali leave. He had done the math that Yuna had showed him months ago, and the numbers had not changed. A Delvari monopoly on Starforge crystals was bad for business. The Pelori Trade Collective issued a formal announcement, an emergency trade embargo on military-grade fuel sales to any active aggressor engaged in hostilities within disputed territory. The wording was carefully neutral. It did not name the Delvari. It did not need to. Everyone knew. The Delvari Armada, already deep in space far from home, suddenly found its fuel supply cut off. Vorath stood on the bridge of the Unbroken Will and stared at the reports piling up on his screen. Vassal ships deserting, supply lines failing, fuel running short, his own people demanding answers, and somewhere out there, that small, infuriating human ship was probably already composing another joke. Far away, in the command center beneath Busan, Admiral Tejo read the same reports. The Armada had stopped. It was not destroyed, not defeated, but it was stuck, confused, bleeding from a dozen wounds it had not seen coming. Day 25, Tejo said quietly, and they have not fired a real shot at us yet. Beside him, Sujin allowed herself the smallest of smiles. It was perhaps the first time anyone had ever seen her do so. The Crumbling Fist. Day 28. 3 days left on the clock. Vorath had not slept in 2 days. The Bridge of the Unbroken Will had become his prison. Reports came in every hour, and every one of them was worse than the last. The Kaylee auxiliary fleet was gone. The Pelori fuel embargo was biting hard. His supply lines were a tangled mess of delays and errors that his officers could not explain. And across the hegemony, vassal worlds were asking questions he could not answer. But Supreme Commander Vorath had not risen to the highest military rank in the Delvari hegemony by being weak. He was proud and stubborn, and above all he refused to go home empty-handed. The humans had made him a laughingstock. The galaxy was watching. If he retreated now, without a single victory, his career was over. His legacy was dust. So he made a decision. He would not fight the entire human fleet. He only needed one victory, one clear, undeniable triumph that would prove the hegemony's power and silence every critic. And he knew exactly where to strike. Nova Incheon. It was humanity's largest colony outside the home system. 2 million people lived there. It had shipyards, factories, research stations. It was a symbol. If Nova Incheon fell, human morale would shatter, and the rest of their resistance would crumble. Vorath gathered the loyal core of his fleet, still over 20,000 warships, more than enough to overwhelm any defense humanity could assemble, and ordered a direct assault. Full speed, no subtlety, overwhelming force against a single target. Burn it, Vorath said. Burn it so completely that no species in this galaxy ever thinks of defying us again. The Armada surged forward. What Vorath did not know, what he could not have known, was that Admiral Tejo had predicted this exact move 8 days ago. Tejo understood Vorath, not personally, but in the way that one soldier understands another. He knew that a proud commander, backed into a corner, would lash out at the biggest target he could find. Nova Incheon was the obvious choice. It was large, it was important, and it was reachable even with limited fuel. Any military mind would see it as the key, so Tejo had turned the key into a trap. The evacuation of Nova Incheon had begun on day 20, carried out in complete secrecy. Civilian transports left under the cover of normal commercial traffic. The shipyards continued to operate. The lights stayed on, and the communication channels carried normal traffic. All of it faked by Sujin's intelligence teams. To any outside observer, Nova Incheon looked exactly as it always had, a busy, thriving colony. But behind the illusion, Dongwu had been very busy. The asteroid belt surrounding Nova Incheon had always been considered a minor inconvenience, a field of dead rocks that ships had to navigate around. Dongwu had turned it into a weapon. Dozens of asteroids had been hollowed out and filled with weapons platforms, missile batteries, and shield generators. From the outside, they looked like ordinary space rocks. From the inside, they were fortresses. The orbital space around the colony had been seeded with mines. Not ordinary mines, but smart mines that could distinguish between human and Delvari ship signatures, and would remain invisible until an enemy vessel came within killing range. And, scattered throughout the entire area, billions of swarm seeds waited in dormant clusters, ready to wake up on command. Tejo had turned Nova Incheon into the most dangerous place in human space, and he had done it while making it look completely undefended. The Delvari fleet arrived on day 29. 20,000 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a wide arc around Nova Incheon, their weapons already powered and their targeting systems locked on to the colony below. Vorath stood on his bridge and looked down at the world he was about to destroy. For the first time in days, he felt something like satisfaction. "Begin bombardment," he ordered. The first wave of Delvari ships moved forward, and the trap closed. The swarm seeds activated first. Billions of tiny drones woke from their hiding places and flooded the space between the Delvari fleet and the colony. Sensors went blind. Targeting systems choked on phantom contacts. Ships that had been flying in clean formation suddenly found themselves stumbling through a fog of electronic noise. Then the mines detonated. They hit the leading ships from below and behind, directions the Delvari shields were weakest. Explosions bloomed across the vanguard. Warships that had survived 100 battles were torn apart in seconds. Debris scattered in every direction, creating new obstacles for the ships behind them. And then the asteroids opened fire. Dongwu's hidden weapons platforms unleashed their full power. Missile barrages erupted from rocks that the Delvari had dismissed as harmless. Energy beams cut through the confusion from unexpected angles. The Delvari were taking fire from everywhere and could not see where it was coming from. But Dongwu had saved his masterpiece for last. He called them resonance lances. For months, Sujin's agents inside the hegemony had been stealing technical data on Delvari shield technology. Every species built their shields differently, and the Delvari used a specific harmonic frequency to maintain theirs. Dongwu had studied that frequency, tested it, and built weapons that matched it perfectly. When the resonance lances fired, the beams did not just hit Delvari shields. They vibrated at exactly the right frequency to tear them apart. Shields that could withstand direct hits from heavy plasma cannons simply shattered like thin glass. The ships behind those shields were left exposed, naked, and helpless. The Battle of Nova Incheon became a massacre. Captain Jinho led the human counterattack. His fleet was small, only 800 ships against 20,000. But he knew every mine, every drone cluster, every hidden platform in the field. His ships danced through their own minefield like they were running through their own backyard, weaving between traps that the Delvari could not even see. Jinho coordinated strike after strike, directing his ships to hit damaged Delvari vessels, to break up formations, to drive panicking ships into minefields. He was not trying to destroy the entire fleet. He was trying to create chaos, and chaos was something he understood better than anyone. 6 hours. That was how long it lasted. In 6 hours, the Delvari lost over 6,000 warships. Some were destroyed by mines, some were torn apart by resonance lances, some were crippled by swarm seeds and left drifting, and some, in the confusion, collided with each other or fired on allied ships they could not properly identify. Human losses were 38 ships. 38. Vorath watched the numbers on his display and felt something he had never felt before in his military career. Helplessness. His fleet was not destroyed. He still had numbers, but his ships were scattered, confused, low on fuel, and facing an enemy that seemed to know their every weakness. His officers were shouting conflicting reports. His shield technology, the backbone of Delvari military superiority, was useless. And the humans were still fighting with a precision that should have been impossible for such a small force. High Diplomat Ilka, who had traveled with the fleet against his better judgment, appeared at Vorath's side. "Commander," he said, his voice tight, "we must negotiate. This battle is lost." "I do not lose," Vorath said. "You have already lost," Ilka replied. "The question is how much more you wish to lose before you accept it." Before Vorath could respond, a new communication appeared on his personal channel. Not a fleet channel, not a military frequency. His personal, encrypted, supposedly secure channel. It was a recording. The voices belonged to members of the Delvari High Council, his own government, discussing what to do if the campaign failed. They spoke about Vorath as if he were already gone. A problem to be disposed of. A name to be erased from history. They had already chosen his replacement. The recording was followed by a single text message from an unknown sender. "Your enemies are not only in front of you. Sujin." Vorath stared at the message for a long time. The sounds of battle continued around him. Explosions, alarms, the groaning of stressed metal. His officers waited for orders. Ilka waited beside him. The supreme commander of the Delvari hegemony closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed. The fire in those orange eyes was gone. What remained was the cold understanding of a man who had finally run out of moves. "Signal all ships," Vorath said quietly. "Full retreat." The Grand Armada, or what was left of it, turned and limped toward home. 20,000 ships had arrived at Nova Inshan. Fewer than 14,000 left. As the last Delvari warships disappeared from sensor range, Captain Jinho opened a broadcast channel. His voice was cheerful, almost casual, as if he had just finished a friendly game rather than the most important battle in human history. "Thanks for visiting Nova Inshan," he said. "Please leave a review. And do come back anytime. We will leave the lights on for you." In the command center beneath Busan, Admiral Taeho listened to Jinho's broadcast and shook his head. Then he sat down heavily in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. They had done it. Against every expectation, against every odd, against an enemy that outnumbered them 50-1, they had done it. Yuna appeared beside him. "It is not over," she said gently. "We won the battle. Now we need to win the peace." Taeho nodded. "Then that part is yours." Yuna smiled. "I was hoping you would say that." The new order. 3 months passed. The galaxy did not return to normal. It could not. Something had shifted in the order of things, like a bone that had been broken and set at a new angle. What had seemed permanent and unchangeable, the Delvari hegemony's unquestioned dominance, was now revealed to be fragile. And everyone, on every world, was trying to figure out what came next. The hegemony was falling apart from the inside. Vorath had been stripped of his rank the day he returned home. The High Council, those same politicians who had sent him to war with speeches about glory and destiny, now blamed him for everything. He was confined to his estate and forbidden from speaking publicly. His name was removed from military records. It was as if the Delvari were trying to pretend the entire war had never happened, which was difficult, given that every species in the galaxy had watched it unfold in real time. But removing Vorath did not fix the deeper problems. The vassal species, the Tani, the Uruk, and the Kelly, had tasted something during the war. Not freedom exactly, something smaller but more dangerous. They had tasted the possibility of freedom. They had seen the mightiest fleet in the galaxy stumble and fall, and they had helped make it happen. That knowledge could not be taken back. The Tani formed a coalition with the Uruk, demanding formal autonomy and representation in hegemony governance. The Kelly went further. They declared full independence, withdrew all their citizens from Delvari space, and sealed their borders. The hegemony threatened consequences, but the threats rang hollow now. Everyone had seen what happened the last time the Delvari made threats. In the middle of this chaos, a message arrived at the Delvari capital. It came from Earth, addressed to whoever was currently in charge. It was written by Yuna, and it was polite, professional, and devastatingly simple. It said, "Whenever you are ready to talk, we are ready to listen." High Diplomat Ilka read the message 7 times. He had opposed the war from the beginning, though he had been careful never to say so too loudly. Now, with Vorath gone and the council desperate, Ilka had been given authority over the hegemony's diplomatic efforts. It was, he understood, a poisoned gift. If negotiations went badly, he would be blamed. But if he refused to negotiate at all, the hegemony would continue to bleed allies and credibility until there was nothing left. He sent a reply to Yuna the same day. Yes, the hegemony would talk. What were humanity's terms? Yuna's terms were not what anyone expected. She did not demand territory. She did not demand money. She did not demand weapons, or technology, or prisoners. Instead, she proposed a meeting, open, public, and inclusive. The peace talks would be held at a neutral station. They would be broadcast on all galactic channels. And they would include not just humans and Delvari, but representatives from every vassal species that wished to attend. Ilka knew what this meant. Yuna was not just ending a war. She was dismantling an empire, piece by piece, with a conference table instead of a fleet. He accepted anyway. He had no choice. The Accord of Station Balhae, as it came to be known, was held on a Pelori trading station that had been emptied and refurbished for the occasion. The name was Yuna's choice, Balhae, an ancient Korean kingdom that had once served as a bridge between different cultures. She thought the name was fitting. The negotiations lasted 11 days. Yuna led the human delegation with the same easy confidence she had shown throughout the war. She smiled often, spoke softly, and gave away nothing she had not planned to give away from the start. Across the table, Ilka fought for every concession, knowing that each one weakened the hegemony further, but unable to refuse because the alternative was worse. The final agreement reshaped the galaxy. The disputed nebula, the one rich in star-forged crystals that had started the entire conflict, became a jointly administered free trade zone, open to all species. No single power would control it. A new council with representatives from humans, Delvari, Pelori, and the former vassal species would oversee its governance. The Tani and Uruk were granted formal autonomy within the hegemony, with their own governments and the right to maintain their own defense forces. The Kali's independence was officially recognized. The Delvari were required to reduce their armada by 40% over the next 5 years. In exchange, they retained their existing territory and were given a seat, one seat among many, on the new joint council. But the most surprising part of the agreement came from the humans. Teho, who had traveled to Station Balhae for the final days of negotiation, stood before the assembled delegates and made an offer that no one had anticipated. He proposed a mutual defense pact, not between humanity and the Delvari, but between all the species present. An alliance built not on domination, but on shared protection. If any member was threatened, all members would respond. "We did not fight this war to become the next hegemony," Teho said. His voice was quiet, as it always was, but in the silence of that room, every word carried. "We fought because we were told to kneel, and we chose not to. But winning a war is not the same as building peace. Peace takes more courage than war. It requires trusting people who were your enemies yesterday. We are willing to take that risk." Dongwu, who had come along because nobody could stop him, offered something equally unexpected. His swarm seed technology and sensor systems, stripped of their military applications, were offered for shared scientific development. The underlying engineering could revolutionize communication networks, mining operations, and deep space exploration for every species in the Alliance. "I built these things to save us," Dongwu said, fidgeting with the sleeve of his lab coat. "But I would rather they were remembered for building something instead of breaking something." Elder Grenick watched all of this from his seat at the edge of the room. His feathers, which had been a cautious gray for most of the conference, slowly shifted to a warm, approving gold. After the final session, Grenick found Yuna in a corridor. She was leaning against a wall, looking tired for the first time since the war began. "I have watched many species rise and fall in my lifetime," Grenick told her. "Every single one followed the same pattern. They gained power, and then they used that power to control others. It is the oldest story in the galaxy." He paused, his feathers bright. "Your species just wrote a new one." Yuna smiled. "We just prefer a third option." "And what is that?" "Making friends. It's harder than making enemies, but it tends to last longer." Grenik made a sound that Yuna had learned was the Pelori equivalent of a laugh, and walked away shaking his head in something that looked very much like admiration. In the months that followed, the changes rippled outward. The free trade zone around the nebula became the busiest region in the galaxy. Species that had never interacted before found themselves working side by side. The Tani, freed from Delvari control, turned out to be extraordinary engineers, and their shipyard designs were adopted across known space. The Orok, no longer forced into labor, became respected builders and architects. The Kelly opened their ocean worlds to visitors for the first time in 3 centuries, and the beauty of those worlds became legendary. Captain Jinho was promoted to Rear Admiral, a title he accepted with visible discomfort. "I liked being a captain," he complained to anyone who would listen. "Captains get to fly. Admirals just sit in meetings." The Horizon was retired from service and placed in a museum at Nova Incheon, which had been rebuilt, not as a military base, but as the galaxy's first truly open spaceport, where ships from any species could dock, trade, and resupply. Sujin continued her work in the shadows. She built new intelligence networks among the former vassal species, not to control them, but to watch for threats to the fragile new peace. She trusted the alliance, but she also knew that peace was not a thing you built once and then ignored. It needed constant tending, like a garden. Admiral Tejo retired. At his farewell ceremony, held in the same plain gray room beneath Busan where the war had been planned, his officers gathered to say goodbye. Someone asked the question that historians would ask for centuries afterward. How did humanity do it? How did a species with 800 ships defeat an empire with 40,000? Tejo stood quietly for a moment, looking at the faces of the people who had fought beside him. Yuna, who had turned words into weapons. Sujin, who had turned secrets into earthquakes. Dongwu, who had turned science into miracles. Jinho, who had turned recklessness into legend. "They told us to kneel," Tejo said. "We told them a joke instead, and while they were trying to figure out the punchline, we changed the game." He paused. "That is what we do. That is what we have always done. We adapt, we laugh, we find a way, and we never, ever kneel." The room was quiet. Then someone started clapping, and everyone did. Across the galaxy, the story of the human war spread and grew, and changed the way every species thought about the strange, stubborn, ridiculous, brilliant creatures from the small blue world on the edge of nowhere. They were not the strongest. They were not the oldest. They were not the most technologically advanced. But they were something that no other species had quite managed to be. Unpredictable in the best possible way. On a dozen worlds, in a dozen languages, a new phrase entered common speech. It was borrowed from an old Earth tongue, and it was used to describe someone who faced impossible odds with a smile and a plan, and the absolute refusal to be afraid. Kalbumden saramdır.